I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, welcome back again. All right, so before we get to the the fun part with Candyman and revolutionary violence, I did do want to do a kind of part 3 on this, because again, shout out to the All African People's Revolutionary Party and this work circle that I'm in. We're continuing to work through Nkrumah's The Handbook for Revolutionary Warfare, and I can't help but notice these, coming back to a couple things that are relevant to my own interests around buying power and Black capitalism. And because I was sent an article that's a couple years old now, but still relevant to this discussion in conjunction with our reading this week, for the study circle, I thought do a quick sort of part 3 on the handbook and the myth of buying power, because in the section we were reading for this week, which deals specifically with revolutionary warfare, and this is a perfect sort of prequel segment to the discussion of Candyman. Nkrumah starts off this section by saying revolutionary warfare is the logical, inevitable answer to the political, economic, and social situation in Africa today. We do not have the luxury of an alternative. We are faced with a necessity. End quote. So already sets a frame here, a very uncomfortable frame here, that I think is underlying or undergirding a lot of the what we've discussed as political pessimism, not necessarily Afro pessimism. I don't want to start that argument this morning, but a sort of political pessimism that leads us with encouragement, of course, with inducement to Black capitalist endeavors. Because I think, and again, I'm not advocating this, certainly not advocating this, but I think that more of us than not do recognize the inevitability, as he describes here, of the logic, at least, of revolutionary warfare. And out speaking for myself, because I've had people get at me when I've suggested that this feeling permeates more broadly, but which I do think, but because I agree with that logic, but am terrified by its conclusions and certainly not advocating or engaged in them, I have found various ways to assuage that fear without, at least to a full extent, abandoning the logic or the analysis that leads to that logic, to that conclusion. So you put other ways, it's a softening of my politics overtly, certainly in practice. It is, some might even say, selling out to a certain extent. I think that's strong, certainly for people like me, but to a certain extent, I don't have a problem with that if this is the standard. But the point is, it's, although I don't accept that, personally, not really, not really. Um, Not adhering in full to that standard, perhaps, but selling out is, I think, a little bit harsh. Even I don't even like passingly making a self-reference in that way, but making other choices, as I think obviously most of us are. But my point is that because we understand on even an unconscious level that Nkrumah is right, we all end up making alternative choices, and with the specific inducements of Black capitalism, that's where many are encouraged to go. All right. So he says also again, and I understand this is not the exact context, and I'm skipping a lot, and this is I'm sort of expanding his context here, but I honestly am not. I'm at this point incapable of not doing it, at least to a certain extent. So he talks about sort of at least two, well, one with a 1A broad points for my purposes here. He talks about the need for a coordinated revolutionary action, and he's talking about continent wide, and he's acknowledging that it can't be done by these falsely imposed states or countries. You can't do one at a time. This is why we know that his broader philosophy includes the United States of Africa, uh, uh, under scientific socialism, but that the continent would operate on a together, because independently we can't do it. And I think in a microcosm here within the United States, whether we think of ourselves as in certain regions or certain classes or segments of the Black community or diaspora within the United States, we can't do it in isolation, because as he says here, internationalists have formed imperialists, he says rather, have formed an international syndicate. So again, on a microcosm, we can't do anything here in isolation geographically, even within this country, and we certainly can't do it in isolation with from those, even if we're talking regionally or as a global diaspora. There's just there can't be the kind of change that any of us claim we want. There can't be radical or revolutionary change without that. And what he talks about in here is that how he specifically makes the point that imperialism and this international syndicate creates and imposes an isolation, that the fracturing and the creation of states out of the continent, the imposing of the Berlin conference's divisions, create an isolationism that, as he says here, is one of the greatest dangers. So as it relates to buying power, or my buying power argument, this international syndicate, imperialist syndicate, has created a situation where it has imposed the isolationist idea of starting Black businesses or making individual changes to our financial literacy and behavior, with the suggestion that if I start a business and you start a business and they start a business and that we can somehow have a response to this. I would even argue to the extent that co-ops are fetishized in certain pockets of the left and not even understood appropriately in this context. It's the same thing, that even small collectives or small pockets can do this in isolation of the whole, is what is encouraged. And I think that, and this is what is dooms us to a failure. So I wanted to just quickly start there. Obviously the rest of that section is more specifically about the organization of the AAPRP, and the People's Revolutionary Army, and training and all this other kinds of stuff. But for my particular narrow selfish focus, this broader understanding of the globalization of the economy and the imposition of Black capitalist fantasy as a form of isolationism that he calls as our greatest danger, is part of the problem. So when shout out to brother Kager, who sent me this article uh the other day, um I think relates to this problem in very well. So this was written in 2017, but again, I think speaks to the problem that we're still dealing with here by Ajamu Nangwaya. Forgive me for any mispronunciation. And the argument, the title, Marcus Garvey's Economic Philosophy has a capitalism problem. And I know many of us have been in this argument or had this debate for years in a variety of different ways, but without belaboring it too much, what I like about what Ajamu has done here is make at least a couple of points that I think again relate to what I'm saying about Nkrumah and this point of buying power. In spite of the positive elements of economic Garveyism, it is not appropriate for African liberation in the 21st century. Many current Garveyites tend to ignore the fact that Garvey's economic development approach was based on reproducing the exploitative system of capitalism, which would continue to oppress the African working class. And again, one of the reasons why I think that being sent this article is timely and fits in nicely with all of this is because so much of the backlash, at least recently, that I'm getting now, or that I think has always existed underneath, and sometimes not so much underneath, in terms of my ability to convey my argument about buying power to certain segments of our community, is the Garveyite tradition, or at least a certain understanding of the Garveyite tradition. So again, just like I'm not saying, just like when I'm saying, just like Du Bois and Malcolm X and many others, that Amos Wilson misunderstood buying power, I'm not saying everything about him is wrong. And just as I'm saying I disagree with Garvey's emphasis on capital and business, that I'm not saying that his overall argument or philosophy is wrong. I'm just saying there are shortcomings. That's all. So, and I do agree with what the author here is arguing, and I think this is part of what is the response to this imposed isolation that Nkrumah is talking about, that results from the imperial order against which we need a very revolutionary response. As it says here, Garvey was quite insistent that capitalism was the path to economic development. In the book Message to the People, The Course of African Philosophy, he had this to say about capitalism. As a fact, the capitalist of today was the laborer or worker of yesterday. Hence, the man who wants to go into business commercially, industrially, or agriculturally and win a fortune for himself cannot and should not be a communist, because communism robs the individual of his personal initiative and ambition or the results thereof. Democracy, interchangeable with capitalism, therefore, is the kind of government that offers the individual the opportunity to rise from a laborer to the status of a capitalist or employer, end quote. In Philosophy and Opinions, Garvey asserts that capitalism is necessary to the progress of the world, and those who unreasonably and wantonly oppose or fight it are enemies to human advancement. Garvey naively called for the state to place constraints on capitalist interests. He might have been unaware of the fact that the state serves and protects the interests of the economic elite. So again, I think this argument pervades a lot of our community, and it is it overlaps so well, in fact, with what right at that very time that Garvey would have been writing this, that people like Edward Bernays were working consciously to create, with the use of propaganda, the psychic relationship in our, or creating for us the relationship psychically between capitalism and democracy. So when Garvey says democracy interchangeable with capitalism, that was exactly what Bernays and the psychological warfare experts of the day were attempting to create among all of us, to have us continue to believe that for you to be free or democratic, you have to also be capitalist. But again, it's Garvey's presentation of this argument, or how that argument is interpreted today among many in our community, that has, I think, an appropriate understanding of the economy hard to reach. So continuing here just a little bit, our interrogation and critique of Garvey's capitalism problem does not repudiate useless elements within his outlook on African liberation. We are simply disassociating ourselves from his enthusiastic support for capitalism that is the enemy of the African working class in Africa and throughout the African diaspora. I agree with that. Many of us are too fixated on symbols and the seductiveness of one-off protest actions, which do not demand the time, dedication, and commitment that come with organizing in membership-based organizations with regular programs, projects, and/or institution building mandate. And I agree. So again, it's not to get into the broader debate about Garvey's platform, but it's just that I do appreciate having been sent that article, and I do appreciate the argument, and that when, as has been happening more recently, as some are critical, particularly among Black nationalists of my own work, their criticism is influenced by a Garveyite style argument that suggests that this sort of isolationist approach, this individual approach to capital formation, is somehow good for the collective, that it has a negative impact on our analysis. But it's also, to Nkrumah's, or to my reading of Nkrumah, it is also that the logical conclusion of the fight that would have to occur for freedom that we would want to take place, it encourages a version of pessimism. It encourages us to walk away and find any other approach possible. So if there is behind it a highly organized psychological warfare campaign encouraging that Black people leave political struggle and focus on economic development, as if one can happen without the other, or as if, as that article said, the state isn't here to protect the interests. The currently formed state is here to protect the interests of capitalists. That there can be no catch up when you're trying to play an isolated economic game, or trying to start businesses, so on and so on. From 1992 to 2012, Black people created more than 2 million businesses and lost the grand total of capture of revenue spent in the country annually, and went down to 0.03%. So it's not a question of starting businesses. It's a question of the relationship to the economy. How is the economy itself developed and arranged, and what would have to be done to change it or end it? All right. Let me stop there on that. We'll come back to this. Obviously, we'll just keep it going as the AAPRP continues to study and I continue to study. I'll be bringing at least some of that here. And obviously, the myth continues to be promulgated. That is the myth of buying power, and more broadly, Black capitalism. So we'll continue to keep taking our swings at it.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.